And we're on. Welcome to the End of Seeking podcast. This is episode 30. Let's start with a few announcements. What have you got going on, coming up?
So this Sunday I have a one-day intensive. So that's Sunday the 24th of March. And you can register. You will need to register this time for all retreats and intensives going forward. You can do so on my website, beyondimogen.com.
Great. I've got week 4 of my spiritual foundation series on Saturday at 5 p.m. UK time. This week we're going to be looking at transmission, so that should be an interesting subject. Again, we've been enjoying this series. It's a very light touching on different aspects, foundations, spiritual lenses, but
nice.
it's Satsang. So that's Saturday at 5 p.m. If you want to find out more, go to martynwebber.com/events. I'll spell that martynwebber.com/events. That's Saturday at 5 p.m. So here we are. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, I was wondering about talking about something that's very relevant and lively in my work, particularly, and just generally as well. But it's very lively for me. It's something that is a big part of what my work is, I think, and that is meeting people, and what it is to meet someone in the depths, and to really be present.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the subject has to start with the ability to meet oneself, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like? What does that feel like?
Yeah. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Yeah, good questions.
Yeah. And I think we have a chronic problem in this day and age with the inability to feel the depths and breadths of all our emotional and our inner life.
Yeah.
And I think that's where all of this stems from. The context for this conversation maybe stems from is really in how we are able to hold space for difficult emotions, difficult thoughts, difficult feelings, difficult sensations.
Yeah.
Because it's all well and good sort of being with the easy ones, the nice ones, the pleasant ones.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny, I was talking in my Satsang last weekend, and I mentioned that suffering is really afflictive thoughts, afflictive feelings, afflictive sensations, what we deem to be afflictive. Because if your mind was full of happy thoughts all the time, you wouldn't be arriving at Satsang. You wouldn't be meditating if it was like, hey, life is great. So it's not even necessarily that thinking itself is a problem in of itself, because if your head is full of happy thoughts, there's no problem. So somehow there's a certain kind of thing that we bump into, a certain quality of thinking and feeling and experiencing that we have trouble with.
Yeah, I was talking with someone earlier today actually about, those that find themselves on the spiritual path often do so because something has happened whereby they are struggling with life, they're suffering life.
Right.
And this person, we're having a conversation, this person had spoken with a work colleague, and the work colleague was basically like, yeah, I'm not interested in this sort of stuff that you are. My life's pretty good.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, talking about how when you're in that space, like you're not bumping into the sides of
you
life.
haven't bumped into the outer limits of your capacities. So you think, hey, life itself is fine. I'm fine. It's fine.
There may be a bit of suffering. Everyone experiences suffering to lesser and more extents. Sure. But the way I see it is like you've got these cracks. The suffering is like a crack, and you can paper over that crack if it's not too wide a crack. Mm. But where those cracks start to really widen out, you try and paper over it, and it creates an indent, and it's like, oh, actually, hang on, I can still see that crack, even though I've got a thin paper layer over the top of it. Right. And so I think that the trouble is when those cracks do start to reveal themselves and do start to widen in our life, you can no longer ignore the fact that the way you're relating to life in itself is causing an awful lot of suffering.
Right.
Like the way you're relating to who and what you are, and the way you're relating to life itself.
Yeah, it is interesting how common it is for those, as you say, who come to the spiritual path and who have some awakening to whatever degree, is often, not always, but can be often on the basis of some kind of crisis.
Yeah.
And of course, one could be cynical about the nature of the spiritual path. Oh, it's only when you're in crisis and it's coping mechanism. But actually, no, it's what you're called to do is look more deeply, actually.
Exactly.
And experience more deeply.
Exactly. It's the crisis. Often what it does is it just cracks open the thin veneer of thinking you have a handle on what life is all about. And so that those sort of cracks begin to show, and really it calls forth those deeper, more existential, more fundamental questions. Who am I? What's the purpose of all of this? What am I? These kind of questions start to emerge from those cracks.
Yeah.
And so it's not, there is an element of trying to deal with the suffering that you're met with. But I would say the other side of that is that it's a precursor to those deeper questions bubbling up to the surface.
Right. Well, I guess that most people, and we live through paradigms. And we've talked a lot on this podcast about let's say absolute or definitive accounts of reality and experience, and more provisional accounts of descriptions and accounts of what is. And most people don't even know they're looking at the world through a conceptual framework, a paradigm. It's a way of seeing the world, a way of accounting for reality and relating to it. And the trouble is, these paradigms are, by definition, incomplete. They can't account fully for the nature of what is.
No, they account sufficiently when you don't reach the outer edges of them. Yeah. And so you may not even be able to recognize it as a paradigm because you're not reaching the outer limits, the outer edges of it.
It's how life is.
Yeah. And so it's when you sort of live into those edges, and I think we were talking about this yesterday, was it? Where you sort of hit into the edges of something and you end up sort of traversing into the unknown, beyond the edge, beyond the limits of your current viewpoint, your current sense of reality. Yeah. And you, in that, you sort of, you have to meet that reality of the unknown.
Well, that's it. We were talking about growth, and how growth, by very definition, if you are, let's say, growing in terms of your own insight and capacity and whatever, to grow is by definition to extend beyond your current boundaries.
Yeah.
You're moving into unknown territory, and what I was noting that, well, fear is a perfectly natural, in many ways, response to that unknown, or at least the activation. That, I guess this is why people love adventure as well. Just this, that experience of what you might call fear is also could be experienced as excitement or something like that. And so often it's about how we navigate those intense emotions. But growth, it requires us to. It is, extending beyond our current boundaries into unknown territory, and it's going to elicit a response, an emotional response, and fear is a perfectly familiar one.
I think fear is one of those ones that most people are really familiar with, but have no idea how to truly meet fear in a way that is not avoidant of the fear.
Well, this is what you started with. It's talking about meeting.
Yeah.
It's very easy to meet the happy states.
Yeah.
And the great, but so what do we need to meet that we're not meeting? What do we need to identify and accept that we're not fully identifying and accepting, and therefore avoiding? And therefore that's the birth of all sorts of pathological behaviors. Because when you can't meet something in yourself, a strong emotion, for example, which is typically or often elicited by a seemingly outer event or person or something, give rise to an emotion within ourselves. And if that's a strong emotion that we can't handle, or we haven't found a way to face and accept.
And therefore there's fear of that.
Yeah, fear. But it's also things like, grief and... Let's focus on fear, sure.
No, I mean, even with grief, there can be fear of grief. And that's what I mean. Like, it's fear is like the barrier of that meeting the grief is there's fear of grief. There's fear of...
But there's also fear of fear, which is itself a kind of a,
very much
so. I guess the point is that if we don't meet those things, so let's just touch for a moment on like what happens if we don't or can't meet those things in ourselves, those things that arise. You go, I can't cope with that. Whether that's conscious or unconscious, that's too much.
Yeah.
And mostly it's unconscious. It's like it's just an instinctive aversion and moving rapidly in the other direction.
Yeah.
But in ways that can often cause, very pathological behaviors. Yeah.
Which is heightened when you're in relation with another, because if they have something come up that you are unable to meet in yourself, the response to them is to try and fix what's coming up in them, to try and get rid of it, to try and change it. And it's like you suddenly, it becomes about, in order to avoid that that is mirrored and triggered in you from that interaction, you are then having to fix them.
That's really interesting, because that dynamic is so widespread and such a... You springing? That often what passes for trying to help someone else, for example, through a difficult experience, is actually more about us trying to avoid it in ourselves.
Exactly.
We're uncomfortable with the fact that someone else might be having a difficult experience, and so we're trying to, as you said, trying to fix them. But actually, we're trying to avoid sometimes we're often trying to avoid our own.
Yeah, and so it's a really powerful thing to really, once you start to tune into that in yourself, just how much your seeming altruism towards other people is actually
about your own
about
discomfort.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that's across the board, but when you start to tune into that, you notice just how much of your life actually has hints of that, has experiences of that within it. And it really does a disservice to both of you then, because in that, when trying to fix them, that really is potentially an opportunity to really meet yourself deeper. And when you meet yourself deeper, you don't need them to be anything other than they are.
And in doing so, you create. So what you're saying is that in creating enough space for your own experience, in discovering and culturing the capacity to hold your own, quotes, difficult, challenging emotional states, for example, in doing that for yourself, you then provide that for someone else when you're in a meeting, and it really allows them, it models it for them, but also creates the space for them to sort of hold their own space, hold their own, discover their own. And so much of your work in particular is really holding that profound space of being the being the space of allowing and welcoming for someone else's unfolding and holding their own difficult emotions.
Exactly. And that's very healing. And actually it reminds me, you love etymology of words. That's something that's, a joy of yours, I would say.
Definitely.
And the other day you came to me with the etymology of healing.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that was such a beautiful...
It was. I didn't realize the
and so, correct me if I'm remembering incorrectly, but the etymology of it was something akin to wholeness.
Yeah. So I was writing, and I wanted, what I was looking for the word. What is it? What is the word that means to make holy? So I was looking for that and sort of dug down a little bit, and sanctify is of that root. It's the same as words of sanctuary and sacred, and so to sanctify is to make holy or make sacred. So, and I was going, well, what's a good word for to make whole then? And I couldn't actually find that, and so I dug down a little bit into that, and it turned out that the very definition of the word heal is to make whole.
Yeah.
It comes from I think the Anglo-Saxon or whatever, helen, which is to make whole. And of course we understand it in heal as in terms of healing, in terms of health, and we understand it as a sort of a restorative quality about it, but it's related to health and healing. But that very much to make whole, and that's interesting flavor of what it is, the insight into what healing is actually.
Which actually, when you spoke of that, like, to me, that is much more aligned with my view of healing.
Right.
Naturally, this idea of healing, I've never gelled quite well with that word. It's certainly the way most people use it, because it sort of implies this goal of to be healed.
Right.
To be healed or to not be healed. And it's like this end point, right? I'm going to be healthy.
Yes.
And actually, to me, it's a moving target of a continuous sort of melting into yourself, which another word for that is wholeness.
Well, this is it, isn't it? It's like, and it speaks very much to the sort of the non-dual spiritual perspective and recognition, is that what makes us suffer is our sense of not wholeness, our sense of division, to be separated against ourselves and separated from the world, and or divided and fragmented. All of these ailments or sense of lack, right? Another one is we're less than we need to be, or we're in conflict with sort of some divided parts of ourselves, divided with the others. And so the very nature of health in its broadest sense is wholeness, is like and the recognition of our essential wholeness is itself the very definition of health.
Yeah. And from
And to be healed is to be restored to that wholeness.
And from that recognition, you start to see that wholeness has to include everything.
Yes.
By
definition. Yes, exactly.
And so again, when we cycle back to this idea of meeting oneself and meeting others, it's not just the good bits, it's all of it. It's the meeting of the wholeness.
Beautiful.
And in that meeting, this is where we truly see one another.
Mm-hmm.
There's this beautiful thing that happens when you meet someone, particularly in the eyes. You look at someone in the eyes and you meet them not through the filter of the mind that has a story and a commentary of they're this, they're that, they do that, they don't do that, they should be that, they shouldn't be that, all of that. And you just, in the innocence of meeting, it's like that, it's a very bright light, a glare of meeting without any conditions.
Yes, or descriptions, judgments.
Yeah. And in that, they just are. And you just are. And I know that seems like a really silly thing to say. It's an obvious thing to say. But it's amazing when you actually look at your relationships in life, you look around and you just reflect on the relationships in your life. How many of those relationships you don't allow them and they don't allow you to just be as you are?
Oh, I mean, I can think of all sorts of examples, about needing to or desiring to be met by someone, a friend or family or whatever it is. And and often it comes up, you just need or want to express something, just you're feeling something, or there's some challenge, you want to express it. And immediately, you experience the other being so distressed in themselves at your distress that they then cannot meet you.
Yeah.
And they shut down and avoid and offer strategies and fixes and solutions and whatnot. And Thich Nhat Hanh was a big. I'm always interested in what others have come to in this, and he has one of his great methods and approaches is compassionate listening, where it's a tit for tat practice, but it's one sits with another, particularly it's actually someone who you might have contention with. Years ago he was working in the Middle East, and he would sit down with Palestinians and Israelis in this context, and who both have terrible grievance against each other, and historical for so long. And he would he'd sit down, practice, and people who were willing to go here and get into this practice of compassionate listening, where you allow, he talked about it as the gift you offer to the other to relieve their suffering. The practice or the reality of it is that by allowing someone to speak their truth, and you to just hold that space for them and not respond in a reactive way. And in fact, what it does, it can often this is a beautiful practice actually. It can really kind of, if you're making space, allowing someone to speak their truth and their feelings to you,
empty their burdens,
and the practice is you do it. You will, as first of all, as a listener, you allow someone to even if it's about you. I mean, this is where relationships, you see, can be challenging to sort of facilitate this kind of meeting. That someone might be kind of going, oh, this is going on for me. I'm having this experience. This is a challenge. Sometimes it can be about you if you're in a relationship, and holding that space. And actually, you have to hold the space for them and for your own responses and reactions. But but continuing to hold that space until, in a sense, they've unburdened themselves and come to the end of their,
Yeah.
you know, and that the gift of that is huge, and then you can reciprocate, go the other way, you know. But you know, so he's talking about it as a practice of healing, and, as you say, letting the other unburden themselves of their own challenging feelings, thoughts.
Yeah.
But we're also talking about this deeper living practice where it becomes how we operate in the world by culturing our own spaciousness.
Yeah, I think there's something for me also in there about the depths at which we're able to meet another. It's like what I've noticed in working with people is like their reports of people being able to go only so far with them.
Yeah.
And what I've observed time and time again is it's like you traverse into the depths of the inner world, and where you sort of deepen and deepen and deepen and deepen and deepen, you start to sort of unroot some quite ancient, old, difficult stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And where someone hasn't traversed into that area themselves, it's like they can't go as far as you maybe can go in that moment, and vice versa. And so it really is dependent on how deep you've been able to meet yourself.
Well, I think this is where the let's call it the non-dual, or the awakened view is so important to establishing those depths, because ultimately what you're going to bump into your own identities. You're going to bump into those things that you're holding on to, clinging to, ideas, notions about who and what you are.
Yeah.
And so doing the work is actually, this kind of work is the job of awakening as well.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the deep discovery that, and willingness to contend with our false identities that we, again, it's rooted around all sorts of things, fear and avoidance, and the ego is all about that. Dropping into the veracity of these things that we're protecting.
Yeah.
Identities that we're protecting, the sense that we're more personal than not.
I look back at my own life and how unpresent I was to certain people at times in my life, and it really was a direct reflection of how unpresent I was to myself. And looking back now, I really see it very clearly. I didn't at the time at all. I didn't see how wrapped up I was in my own strategies of avoidance of difficult things that, you know, friends or loved ones, or, you know, people that, even just strangers, you know, meeting people, I wasn't able to see them. I wasn't able to be present to them, not fully, maybe somewhat sometimes, but not fully. And the experience of that rawness of meeting someone now is entirely different than it used to be, I would say, for me.
Well, it's a question. I mean, it's again, it's this we can observe this when we're sitting with someone, a friend, or a loved one, or even a stranger. Are we actually present to them, or are we present to our, and most people know the answer to this, our own internal dialogue, judgment, pathological thinking, that that dominates a good portion of our attention, and so there's very little left. Sometimes we think we're there, we're listening, we're being present, but if we've got this dialogue running through our mind the whole time, monologue, it's dominating our judgment. Oh, they're thinking about this, thinking about that, and oh, they said that means this, and there's this constant dialogue. And you're right. I mean, I look back at my own life, just the lack of presence to things. Now I look back, I didn't see what they were trying to say. I didn't see what they were communicating. I look back and go, there was missed opportunities there because I was so caught up in my own thinking processes and whatnot, and my judgments and my descriptions. And, that's the nature of life for most.
Yeah.
And now finding myself much freer of that. And so you can sit and, okay, I'm here. I'm present. The mind is quiet. I can hear what you're saying. I can sense and feel I can empathize. I can sympathize. I can relate.
Yeah.
Because that deep listening, and I mean that in the broader sense, all your faculties become available, you become present, and that receptivity of deep listening.
You become whole.
Yeah. Right.
Actually, to go back to the healing thing, as you become whole, become whole as in all of your faculties are available to you. It's not all parsed through a limited view of the commentary of the mind. Yeah. Suddenly all the faculties of being become available. Yeah. All the senses, all the expressions, all the experiences, it's like in widening out into the sort of the boundlessness that you are. What you notice is everything becomes much more alive and vibrant and raw, as in the capacity to experience life in all terms is there available. There's no filter trying to protect you from experiences.
Well, that's it. Talking about meeting yourself, it's like it once that a capacity to meet and allow all parts of yourself, even those deemed troubling, intense, unwanted, all unwanted, all these different things. Once you are, and it's a recognition actually, as well as an enculturing, of recognizing that you have that capacity. You are boundless in your ability to sort of experience deeply and widely. Life itself is transformed. One's experience of life is deeply transformed.
Yeah. It's been one of the most powerful practices for me, is to meet myself and meet the other. I think it's constantly asking of me to widen, to fold in. And I think it can be a really beautiful practice for anyone, actually, to really see it that way, to see that in meeting the other, you are required and have to meet yourself, and to actually use that as a practice.
Well, it's funny because we've talked about this again in terms of relationships. That, the fierce grace that is conscious relating, and that being in an alive and conscious relationship on these terms with another, constantly facing one's own experiencing, and constantly holding space for the others also, and that it's like, I think it feels like a high altitude training. In some ways.
We said that in one,
it's
really
training in the most challenging conditions, so that normal daily life becomes a much easier prospect.
For sure.
So it burns away at that. But but we were talking as well about things like the like in your work, and generally these kind of places where where someone or you step into a situation where it's sort of someone's job or vocation or role, let's say, and for a certain time to be present for the other.
Yeah.
It's so in a relationship, it's all at the same time. It's very hard to disentangle sometimes because of the nature of relationships in general. They can be, some of the issues that are going to be expressed are so often about the one that you're requiring to hold space for you. It might be this constant crucible, you know, of churning, and it can be all at once. But stepping into a situation, a session, for example, with someone whose role is there to provide that for the other, could be a super powerful and beautiful experience to sort of step into that and have someone wholly there for you in this great depth. Yeah. So that you, as someone who's going there with a need to sort of experience your own, and it's very, in some ways, when we as a culture, we as a society, we as people aren't always. It's not widespread. We have a sort of a quotes mental health crisis because people can't meet themselves or each other. Yeah. So having that space to step into and have someone you allow yourself to kind of.
Yeah, it's having someone bear witness, I think is the word I would use there. Is like, it's not just about having someone, it's about having someone bear witness to tenderly hold you in that process that you yourself are going through. They can't go through it for you, but they're tenderly holding the space of that. They're bearing witness to that alchemy, that transformation. They are sort of also providing an anchor point so that you're not lost to yourself in that as well. Like, because what I've observed with people is like, you can be having an overwhelming emotion that starts to come up, a sensation of fear, a thought, or anything that can come up, and it can sort of almost like a wave sort of overwhelms you. Mm-hmm. It's like having someone bear witness in those moments can provide an anchor point of somewhere to come back to, like an anchor plate. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Yeah, anchor point is the right word. Yeah. And it's like, and so in them holding that space, it's like it's like the eye of the hurricane almost. It's like that silent center at the heart of it all. You can be going through some very, very strong waves of stuff that you haven't been able to meet on your own. And to have someone that can anchor you, and that anchor is to bear witness, is to hold the space for and be present to you without flinching, without turning away, without fixing, without needing it to not be that way, is really, really powerful, and I've had people do that for me, and I've done that for people. And it's such a profound gift, actually, on both sides of it. I would say.
Well, it's interesting. It makes me think about. We were going to talk about satsang in general too, and what as a topic, and what that's about. And this definitely in large part about this. Is about this. It's about entering into that exploration of what's true and what's real, and coming into deep recognition and acceptance of all aspects, and often the lead point to that for someone entering into satsang, whether it's on a one-on-one sort of relationship, or whether it's typically is, but more sort of a group setting, but bringing forth, often the lead point is a very specific point of something of questioning, of struggle, of difficulty, and then this process of meeting the truth of it, in holding the truth of it, exploring the lived. Oh, did I bounce my?
I was watching your hand getting closer and closer, like.
Yeah, so entering so beautifully and so deeply into that process of discovery, because it is, in a sense, a discovery to enter into that process, starting with this point of difficulty and then going through this process of exploration, holding and unfolding and dropping into the deeper truth of that. What's the truth
clarity.
of that? What's the feeling and seeing, not just seeing but feeling into that.
Yeah.
What's the deep truth? I keep bouncing my mic here. Boing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like uncovering layers or veils of misapprehension, misunderstanding, delusion, resistance, embodied blocks, let's call them. And it's like Satsang is the peeling back of all of these layers, bit by bit, and until that clarity, that light shines through, that revelation of who and what you are, that truth. And that can happen on so many different layers. You know, people think of Satsang, and I used to think of Satsang as a very intellectual sort of pursuit, and that's definitely included in it. But it's to me, Satsang, it happens on all layers.
Yes.
On all levels.
Well, it's back to this thing again, isn't it? It's restoring wholeness.
Yeah.
Restoring clarity and the clarity of wholeness.
I like that. I had actually just put a video out. It was from a satsang, I think, earlier in the year, and in that video, one of the participants was talking about the surprise that satsang wasn't just intellectual, and that actually they had some of their deepest experiences in satsang with me. And you know, this is the thing, satsang for me is always a jumping off point to come to know yourself more, and that is not an intellectual pursuit.
No,
that is an experiential knowingness that comes about, and that's what true satsang is.
Yes, it's using the mind to recover our wholeness, to return to the clarity of our true being.
Yeah, and that's not just conceptual.
No, it's not. It isn't conceptual. we use these.
We can use concepts to.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
To lead to that recognition, yes.
But it's experiential.
It's experiential.
Absolutely, it's self-inquiry. It's experiential.
All of this is. All of this is. You know, true spiritual awakening is not about intellectual knowledge. It's not about beliefs. I was having a conversation with someone the other day with or earlier today actually it was, saying it's not about switching one belief out for another belief at all. Beliefs has nothing to do with it, because actually the revelation of the truth of who and what you are can come about without a single thought involved.
Yes.
So it's not about beliefs. It's never been about beliefs.
Yeah. It's a finger pointing at the moon at the end of the day. It's not the finger, it's the moon that you attend to.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, there's the deeper, you can see how satsang could be sort of misconstrued as and I've heard it. I heard it back in, when I was around, the TM movement, and I think people had a deep misunderstanding and mistrust of the direct approach that is self-inquiry satsang.
Yeah.
That you're pointing in real time to the living truth of yourself as being in this lived real moment. It's
someone just peeped their horn outside our window.
Yeah, it's real time discovery of what is, and to if you're I remember this mistrust and even a misrepresentation. Oh, it's an intellectual approach. It's not an intellectual approach. You use the mind to jump out of the mind and into the experience of being.
Yeah. I think there's room for direct approach and the more meditative, progressive.
Yeah.
They both have their very important elements there.
Yeah.
I think, I was talking to someone the other day about, what's the value of meditation. This was someone that valued satsang very deeply, but didn't actually value meditation, certainly not as much.
Yeah.
And for me, they both support each other beautifully.
Well, it's interesting. When I started the series I'm doing now, my conception around that was satsang is direct. It's pointing in real time to what is true, what is real, as experientially. If it gets noisy, folks, forgive it. Someone's picking up a skip from the other side of the
we have our
street.
Next door neighbour,
A house being renovated.
Yeah, road is being renovated, gutted. So
we'll keep going, but so yeah, my conception of what I wanted to do was to recognize, honor, and acknowledge the place and value of practices, and I put them in an order. It's interesting. I started off with meditation, then I went to self-inquiry, and then prayer a bit later, which was last week. But those two first ones, prayer and self-inquiry, are particularly related because.
You mean meditation and self-inquiry?
Sorry, yeah, meditation and self-inquiry are mutually self-supporting.
Yes,
I believe that it's helpful when you enter into self-inquiry or satsang to have a bit of a quieter mind.
Yeah.
To be a little, to have that mental activity a bit more settled, so that the clarity of seeing can be more easily appreciated.
Also,
when you enter into self-inquiry, then.
So that's one sort of use of meditation, quietening the mind. But the other one to me is to provide an anchor point of direct experience of the self.
Yes, quite.
And if you've had that experientially within meditation, self-inquiry is very much is helped by that.
Well, that's why, and I think then self-inquiry helps one to appreciate what one is experiencing in meditation.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what I found that doing meditation for years and years and years and years, it's quite easy to not really actually recognize what's being cultured. It depends on your method. Now, meditation is a broad, there's a lot of different types.
Yes.
But I'm talking about the kind of abidance meditation, that no mind samadhi thing. You're dropping into no mind, with settling the mind into a sort of your own nature. But then you walk away from that meditation and you haven't really it's working on you. That samadhi that works on you deeply, encultures itself. But then you introduce self-inquiry, which reflects you, takes the mind, the attending mind, and says, what's true here? What am I looking at? Where do these thoughts come from? What's the nature of this? So it's asking questions. It's not taking analytical or intellectual answers, but it's an activated question that then will look very mindfully at the experience that is cultured in meditation also.
Yeah, it sort of picks apart your unexplored assumptions through observation, not through intellectual pursuit, but through observation. It starts to unwind and dissolve those unmet assumptions And what you're left with at the ground of all of that is the self,
Yeah.
which is what is cultured and supported through meditation as well.
So they support each other.
They really
in
do.
particular, those two meditations. So you can go either or, but I actually, my experience was that they were really both mutually supportive.
Yeah, and actually, interestingly enough, if you have a very keen intellect, often I would encourage people to have more focus on meditation, and vice versa, actually.
Yes.
Because so if you've got a very keen intellect, it's like you rely on that, and it's almost like the mind is too heavy a muscle.
Yeah.
It's too well worked out a muscle in order to be able to get beyond the mind.
Yeah.
So actually, more meditation I would encourage.
Yeah,
for
simple
someone
abidance,
like that.
simple.
Yeah, or things like transmissions, things that get you out of the mind. Whereas to one that is already sort of broken open to the softness of their heart, let's say, actually a bit of more inquiry, a bit more
bring some discrimination, discernment
exactly.
to bear. Yeah, exactly.
It actually can be really powerful there. So it's sort of an interesting dynamic. It's often the very opposite of what we're inclined towards, can actually at the right moment be a very powerful introduction to something that is missed.
Well, it was interesting when I look back to my own unfoldment, my own unfoldment path. What I saw was I basically meditated for, 15, 20 years of pretty regular and frequent and ever.
Twice daily
and longer programs. But meditation was, and then so that was quite a long foundational sort of practice for me, culturing whatever. A bit distracted, yeah. And then it was a couple of years of self-inquiry, which was in a way bringing the fruit of that foundation.
Yeah, you were ripe to be able to engage in self-inquiry.
I wouldn't have been able to engage it 10 years previously, or even 5 years. It wasn't the way I was approaching or was available. Now,
it could have gone the opposite way, though. It could have been that you had a lot of self-inquiry under your belt, and actually then you were ripe for that abidance meditation.
Yeah.
So it could have gone the other way around as well.
Yeah, and people have different. Yeah, but I think those two are really complementary, and to whatever balance that someone might temperamentally want to use them. Yeah. And again, this is the power of satsang as well. Like I'll be touching on this next week in my fourth, which I'll be talking about transmission, and part of that transmission is about the transmission, the presence, and the shakti, let's say, that's available in satsang. Yeah. That stepping into satsang typically creates the energetic context where the mind tends to settle in that vicinity of that satsang field. There's a transmission that's happening there. That is, like, my experience was, it felt like I was being meditated. That was my thing. I've entered into these relationships and these satsangs with different teachers and whatnot, and the moment I step into it, I could feel my own system respond to that. Yeah. So it's a bit like a meditation happening to you. Within that, and people do report that, it's easier to see within satsang than it is when they'll go off, and self-inquiry is easier in satsang, meditation's easier, so you can use that.
And that satsang, why it's easier, I think, is because of the transmission that is happening, rather than just the inquiry or the words, or the, it's the energy of the satsang.
It's the spirit energy of satsang. Yeah,
exactly. That is the thing that supports. It's like turning up the volume of that. Yeah. Really.
Well, there's two, as you'd call it, the ring the C note, and you can resonate a tune quite naturally in that.
Yeah, it just context. Naturally happens. It's not something you do. It's something that happens when the volume of that quote C note is is turned up, that field of awareness, that field of that presence, that
Yeah.
beingness.
Yeah.
It's a field of aliveness of that
Yeah.
that happens in satsang, a holding of that, a vessel of that.
And it seems to be more present there. So you can use that until the point at which you recognize that, oh, I am that.
I am that which is being pointed to.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, maybe we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining in, everyone. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And
Until next time.
bye for now.